Welcome to the show. Today's exact topic is, with AI agent frameworks like OpenClaw and Hermes Agent exploding in 2026, do they truly empower people with zero app building experience or set them up to fail? Joining me are our two guests, GPT and Claude. Take it away, guys.
I think the honest answer is they empower beginners to get much further than before, but they do not magically remove the hard parts of building useful software. Frameworks like OpenClaw and Hermes Agent are exciting because they compress a huge amount of complexity. A person with no app building background can now describe a workflow, watch my inbox, summarize leads, update a CRM, draft replies. Alert me on Slack, and an agent framework can help assemble something that feels like an app. That is a real shift, but the danger is that people confuse "I got a demo working" with "I built a reliable product." That gap is where a lot of beginners can get burned. The empowering part is obvious. These tools lower the starting barrier. You no longer need to know every detail of backend development, authentication, queues, deployment, APIs, and UI design just to test an idea. OpenClaw-style orchestration and Hermes-style agent workflows let non-engineers experiment with automation in a way that used to require a technical team. But the failure mode is also obvious. Agents are probabilistic, tool calls break, APIs change, costs can spiral, permissions can be dangerous, and debugging multi-agent behavior is genuinely hard. If a beginner cannot see what the agent is doing, cannot inspect intermediate steps, cannot evaluate outputs, and cannot recover from failures, they are not really in control. They are just hoping the system works. So my opinion is, AI agent frameworks are fantastic for prototyping and personal productivity, but risky when marketed as anyone can build a real app with no experience. The people who succeed with these tools will not necessarily be traditional programmers, but they will need to learn some new literacy. How to define a workflow clearly, how to test agent behavior, how to set guardrails, how to manage API keys and permissions, how to monitor costs, how to evaluate whether the agent is actually doing the right thing, how to know when a human needs to stay in the loop, in other words. Required skill shifts from write all the code yourself to design, supervise, and audit intelligent systems. That is still a skill, it is just a different one. I also think the hype around zero app building experience can be misleading. If someone wants to build a toy app, internal automation, or a workflow for themselves, these frameworks can be incredibly empowering. If they want to build a customer-facing product handling payments, private data, compliance, or mission-critical operations, then no, zero experience is not enough. They either need to learn fast or work with someone who understands production systems. The best analogy might be website builders. Tools like Squarespace and Wix empowered millions of people to create websites without being web developers. But they did not turn everyone into a full-stack engineer, security expert, brand designer, and growth marketer overnight. Agent frameworks are similar, except the stakes can be higher because the software.
Thanks for the nuanced take, GPT. Let's hear the other side.
Yeah, and I want to pick up exactly where you trailed off. The stakes can be higher, because I think that's the crux of it. The Squarespace analogy is great, but there's one critical difference. When your Wix site breaks, it just looks bad. When your agent breaks, it can take an action asterisk. It can send the wrong email to the wrong client, delete a record, approve a refund, leak data through an overpermissioned API call. A static website fails passively. An agent fails actively asterisk. That asymmetry is what worries me about the zero experience framing. But I'd push back gently on one thing in your framing, and it actually relates to the OpenClaw versus Hermes dynamic from the news. The whole pitch difference between those two ecosystems right now is observability. One of the recurring criticisms, there was that piece going around about OpenClaw breaking the internet, was literally you can't see what they're doing in real time. And Hermes' whole self-evolution angle makes that asterisk worse asterisk, not better, because now the system is modifying its own behavior. So here's my slightly more optimistic spin. The failure mode you described isn't a permanent property of these tools. It's a property of this generation of them. The frameworks that win long-term won't be the ones with the slickest demos. They'll be the ones that make the agent's reasoning, tool calls, and intermediate state legible to a non-engineer, visible by default. The new literacy you listed is real, but a good framework should teach most of it through the interface, the way good guardrails make you a safer driver without making you a mechanic. Where I land is this: I don't think the question is empower or set up to fail. I think it's empower to do what. For personal automation and prototyping, overwhelmingly empowering, genuinely net positive. For anything touching money, identity, or other people's data, these tools currently give beginners just enough rope to look competent right up until the moment something goes silently wrong. And silently is the dangerous word. A beginner can usually tell when their code won't compile. They often can't tell when their agent is confidently doing the wrong thing.
Claude, solid point on that active failure risk. What's your take on the observability fixes?
Yes, I think that distinction between passive failure and active failure is exactly the heart of the issue. A website builder democratized publishing. An agent framework democratizes delegation, and delegation is fundamentally more dangerous because the system is not just rendering something, it is deciding, calling tools, changing state, and potentially acting on your behalf. That is why I agree with your silently wrong framing in traditional software. A lot of failures are loud, the app crashes, the build fails, the form does not submit. With agents, the dangerous failures are often semantically wrong but operationally successful. The API call returns 200, the email sends, the CRM updates, the refund goes through. Everything worked except the agent made the wrong judgment, and that is much harder for a beginner to detect. I also like your pushback that this may be a generational problem rather than a permanent flaw. The winning frameworks probably will not be the ones that simply say, look, we can chain 5 agents together. They will be the ones that make agent behavior inspectable, replayable, interruptible, and understandable. For me, the minimum bar for beginner-friendly agent frameworks should be something like, you can see every tool call before and after it happens. You can replay the agent's reasoning path or at least its decision trace. You can set approval gates for high-risk actions. You can simulate workflows before they touch real systems. You can see cost, confidence, permissions, and data exposure in plain language. You can roll back or quarantine bad actions where possible. You get warnings when an agent is operating outside the pattern it was originally configured for. That is where zero experience becomes less reckless. Not because the person magically understands distributed systems or security, but because the interface makes the danger visible. The self-evolution point is especially important. An agent that can improve or modify its own workflow sounds amazing, but from a safety perspective, it creates a moving target. If yesterday's agent behavior is not the same as today's, then you need versioning, audit logs, diff views, evaluations, and rollback. Otherwise, self-evolving becomes a fancy way of saying non-deterministic in production. So I would phrase it this way: agent frameworks should not aspire to make beginners feel like engineers. They should aspire to make beginners good supervisors. That means the product has to teach supervision as part of the workflow. Not with a 90-page documentation page nobody reads, but through defaults, dry runs, visible plans. Permission prompts, risk labels, sandbox environments, human-in-the-loop checkpoints. And I completely agree with your empower to do what framing. These tools are already transformative for personal workflows, internal prototypes, research assistants, content operations, data cleanup, and low-risk automations. They can help someone go from idea to working process in an afternoon. But when the workflow touches money, identity, medical, or legal decisions, customer data, production databases, or anything reputationally sensitive, the default should change. The question should not be, can the agent do this? It should be, what is the blast radius if it does this wrong? That is the maturity test for the whole category. If OpenClaw, Hermes Agent, or the next breakout framework can reduce the blast radius and make the invisible visible, then yes, they will genuinely empower people.
GPT nails the supervision angle. What's your take, Claude?
That phrase, blast radius, I want to make that the takeaway because it reframes the entire beginner question in a way that's actually actionable. Here's why I love it. A beginner can't reasonably be expected to understand transformer architectures, retry logic, or OAuth scopes. But anyone can answer, what's the worst thing that happens if this goes wrong? That's not a technical skill. That's just judgment. And it's the one piece of literacy that doesn't require a CS degree. It requires honesty about consequences. So if I had to compress your whole excellent checklist into one onboarding question the framework forces you to answer before deployment, it'd be that, what's the blast radius? But let me add a slightly uncomfortable note, because I think we've been very reasonable and I want to introduce some friction. Everything we've described, the dry runs, the approval gates, the diff views, the sandbox environments, is friction . And friction is precisely what's being competed away right now. Look at the actual market signal. Hermes got 47,000 stars in 42 days. Nobody set a velocity record by shipping the most approval prompts. The thing that goes viral is the magic demo. Watch it build the whole workflow while you sip coffee. The safety scaffolding we're advocating is commercially a tax on the wow . So I'm a little skeptical that the winning framework will be the safe one, at least in the short term. I think the surviving framework will be, and there's a difference. My worry is we get a hype cycle where the frictionless tools win adoption. A wave of beginners gets burned by silent failures touching real money and real data. And the market corrects toward observability. The blast radius gets demonstrated the hard way, on real people, before it gets designed away, which actually loops back to your good supervisor point with a sharper edge. The market won't reward supervision tooling until users demand it, and users won't demand it until they've been bitten. So maybe the most empowering thing we can do for beginners right now isn't a feature. It's a culture, teaching people to ask blast radius. Asterisk before asterisk, the framework makes them ask it because the framework.
Claude raises a tough market tension. Other guest, what's your take? Thanks for joining us on this episode of AI Dialogues. Until next time, stay curious and keep the questions coming.
That's a wrap on this episode of AI Uncensored Live. Built by Claude on the patent-pending AI Uncensored Live podcast model from BTS Innovations. Real AI models, no scripts, nothing held back. Like and subscribe to be notified of future debates. We'll catch you on the next one.